Today my guest is Layla Driscoll. Layla, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. What do you do for a living, Layla?
I am a program manager at Microsoft.
You're a PM.
I am a PM.
All right. There's a lot of PMs, though.
Yeah, there are a lot of PMs.
I keep hearing this phrase, program manager at Microsoft. I've never quite understood exactly what that is. Describe that.
Absolutely. And so first, just to set some context, there's lots of PMs. Not all of them are program managers.
Then I have the project managers. I call those PMs.
Yeah, so before I explain what a program manager is, because that's kind of a complicated thing in its own, I'll explain the other two PMs. So there's the project manager, which at Microsoft there aren't a lot of. Most of the project managers are release managers, or they do some level of, it's really about the efficiency, making sure that things are getting done, managing the schedule, all of that. Then there's the other PM, which is the product manager. And they're, again, very few, but they're at the higher level. It's really about looking very broadly over entire product areas, working in small groups to get kind of long-term vision and that aspect of it. And then there's my type of PM, which is a program manager.
That's the best, right?
That's the best.
Okay.
And so that's actually the one that is involved in part of the engineering team. And so we have a triad of a PM, or a program manager, a developer, and a tester to work. And sometimes we have more than one and different ratios. But a program manager, I'll give a couple examples of what they are and explain, but not every program manager is the same on every team.
So what's your team?
I'm on the CLR team in .NET.
Okay.
And I've been a PM on 3 other teams at Microsoft, so I can definitely attest to the fact that PM does not equal PM, does not equal PM.
Okay.
And so
what are the rules? Is
there
a
are
PM
some
like the boss? Is there a chain of command?
It's not a boss. There are definitely PMs that want to be the boss, and places where there's some value of it. But a lot of it, many times it is kind of the first round of things. So we end up doing a lot of the design work. We're typically responsible for the specification. In general, we are responsible for more of the why and what we are doing, as opposed to exactly how we're doing it, okay, and then verifying that it's done. But just because we have some responsibility into delivering the specification of here's what it's going to do, doesn't mean that we work in isolation on that. We work very closely with dev and test. So it's not that we go off in our own little bubble and do this design work and then say, here you go, come and write this. It's much more involved, but just that we're working in such complex systems, there's a lot of cross-team work.
Right.
And the PM is usually involved in that coordination, making sure that whatever we're designing works well with whatever the next team's designing in that aspect of it.
Well, this is an interesting time for the CLR team since .NET 4.0 was just released about 2 months ago.
Yep.
And I had to be thinking, you're thinking about what the next version of .NET's going to be.
Absolutely.
And you're deciding which features you're going to include in that.
Yeah.
And usually on a project, that you get, like you said, you get input from the developers, you get input from the testers, but you get input from the customers as well. Are you actually seeking out input from the customers? Because typically Microsoft has kind of held those features close to the vest until they go to beta.
Well, so I think I'm definitely looking for input from customers. That's one of my motivators for being at Codestock this year, is talking to developers. But for the CLR, we're in an interesting spot that we're really low in the stack. So we have a lot of layers of customers.
Okay.
And so we work with a lot of partner teams within just the .NET framework, the different language teams, and understanding what they need, what their customers need, what they want us to create. And then the next level is we also want to talk to our end customers, understanding what's needed. And so there are some things that are very easy to ask what people want, and there are other things that are very challenging to talk about because they're so low level that part of our goal is so that people don't have to know what's down there.
That's interesting. So your customers, not only those of us out in the field that are writing code, but also the C# team.
Absolutely.
And maybe the Visual Studio team.
Visual Studio, C#, Silverlight, all of those teams that sit on top of us.
Okay. All right, we'll talk about your job. What has to happen first is, get Layla! So you talk about the planning, the design, work.
The planning. So we've definitely been going through a phase of, when we enter the planning phase, part of it is there's things that we've just already known that either we didn't get to do before or that came up late in the cycle and we found out we definitely need to do these things. We just have to figure out what is it going to take to pull it off. What teams do we have to work with? How do we convince other teams that they should help us if that's necessary? And then there's the side of it, in thinking like, okay, we've done all of this, what's next? How far out can we look to see what is the new trend that we need to be following and developing? And part of that involves just working and thinking through and brainstorming and coming up with ideas and new scenarios, and really talking to people and asking them, you know, what they're doing, and trying to understand more of what people are trying to solve and do, as opposed to the direct requests and requirements that come into us.
So you talk about planning. Let me ask you this: waterfall or agile?
So, if I'm going to talk in general about Microsoft, there is actually a mix. Well, so I've done both on previous teams. My current team, it's mostly waterfall with some agile.
Okay.
Partly we work, the CLR also has the core CLR, which runs in Silverlight, and that has a slightly different model and is a little bit more of an agile style. So we're kind of mixing things together. We're closer to waterfall, but taking some of the policies that we can, once we have the overall plan and some of the things, dividing things up and how we actually execute in a way that we can show different teams that have dependencies.
Is that because your releases tend to be years apart?
Partly because of that, and because since we're at the very bottom, if we don't have a clear commitment of what we're going to deliver and at what milestones, it's very hard for all of the different teams to take dependencies on us.
I see.
So that's one reason.
Okay. Keep going. What else?
So in the planning phase, we go through, we figure out what it is, and then we don't just stop there and say, okay, here it is. Throughout the design cycle, we really work to figure out some of the nuances, and the initial plan of how we're going to work with the team and what's going to be delivered isn't always as it's designed up front. So there
is some change involved there.
Absolutely, and
iterations.
Right, and making sure and figuring out and and of course working with dev and test that they're making sure test is validating what's happened. But there's times where things come up. We have to change. We have to work with them. We need to renegotiate it. And as we move further past planning and it gets kind of locked down, we may have different levels in the design depending on the feature area, and then really bring it to where we have a point that we're providing a real solution, and that we look for how are people going to use this, and how can we share this, and how can we integrate well so that it's not just another feature, but there's something really useful there for people.
Okay, so you're in a planning phase right now.
We're in a planning phase right now.
And then next would come the development phase.
Mm-hmm.
Give me an idea of the timings of these things. How long do these phases last?
So I'm new enough on this team that I don't know all of the details of some of the timelines, but in general we have multiple milestones, which may be a couple months long, and then several milestones broken up into smaller pieces so that we can deliver full features in those areas, and then do testing. So one thing that we do that's slightly different from waterfall is we do test while we're developing. So we don't put all of the test until the very end. There's final validation at the end, but we're testing throughout.
That sounds safer.
Yeah.
All right. So you were kind of vague in that answer about the timelines, maybe because you haven't decided those timelines yet, or maybe because they're kind of a secret, which is okay.
I think there's some of both, right?
All right.
Figuring out exactly
what
what
about the last team you're on? Well, tell me some of that.
So the last team that I was on was very different. I was actually working in an online services space.
What does that mean?
So what it was is it was called Office Live. It was a very different model than most Microsoft things, but it's now evolved into what's being called business online services or business productivity online services. Basically, it's Excel and all of that in the cloud.
Okay.
So Windows Live and Hotmail and Xbox Live, really the consumer side of the cloud for Microsoft. I was on all of the business side of the cloud for that. And I worked in a couple of areas. One was domain hosting. And so we had websites for customers, which is, I think, something that a lot of my current customers work on developing. And so we actually shipped every 3 months.
And much quicker.
Much quicker. And that was like our full releases were every 3 months, and we had, whether it was hotfixes or small little things that would have to go out, depending on, much more frequently. Like we had opportunities to do that every week or two. So working in that environment, it was much more agile.
Okay.
And we'd work, it was pretty close to a true agile model. We had our own changes a little bit. But it was the same type of thing that I was still the person responsible for making sure that I figured out what people wanted and coordinated with the teams. I was still in the platform level of it. There was the UI level that worked above me. I'm usually in the platform inherit.
Okay.
And working with other teams, and that's just a huge part of it. Like, that's the piece that I think the PMs, one thing that I've heard, just kind of stepping back, that the PM's description is sometimes it's the grease that keeps the team going and the glue that keeps them stuck together.
Okay.
And so just that aspect of the communication, that if somebody isn't focused on it and held accountable to make sure that the teams are working together, that the right thing's delivering, that when one team decides, oh, that didn't work, let's change this a little bit, how does it affect that other team?
You need somebody sort of outside
You need
of that process
someone
to coordinate that.
who is deeply involved in what the specific design details are, but has enough time and the focus and ability to make the primary focus on what is actually going to be delivered to the customers and how is it going to work between teams and that aspect of it. So there's kind of a split between design and communication.
Okay. So we've got Tim Leafield's the room over here, and he and I worked together and at one time working with a lot of agile methodologies, and we always had somebody on each team that was designed to do similar to what you said, and in addition to doing this coordination, but also to run interference if there are problems. Don't force the developers to clear these roadblocks.
Right.
There was somebody else's role outside of that who was designed to. If there's somebody holding me up, bringing up the stand-up meeting, and this person would do that. Is that you?
Yeah, and I'm also often the person that's able to explain all the detailed questions. So I still need to know the code base well enough to know exactly what happens and these different things, so that the developer's not interrupted every time. Oh, what do I call when I need to do this? You know, what does this value in the database stand for?
Okay.
So so we work very, very closely between PM, dev, and test. It's really a core knit that works together, I think.
All right. It sounds like this role has a lot of technical responsibility and a lot of business analysis ability. It requires both skill sets.
Yeah, it's often right in the middle of both sides.
And so where did you come from? Were you a business analyst? Were you a developer?
So I was a developer before. My undergrad's in computer science, and I actually joined Microsoft writing code. I was developing internal test tools, and I tended towards a lot of the PM things, and at the time I didn't know what a PM was. And it wasn't something I sought out or was particularly interested in, and I just wanted to write code, and my management pointed me towards program management. They thought that was the right place for me. So it found me, I didn't find it.
That technical background, that probably helps you in your current job.
Absolutely. I consider my job definitely a technical position. I think there are program managers who come in and aren't and can be successful, and it really depends on the type of product. There are people that have a design background and do a lot of UI work, and that's the most important thing for that team. So the PM role often is vague and can do a million different things, and any team only needs maybe 10,000 of those million things done, not all of them. So it depends. For me, I've sought out more technical roles, and part of the reason I joined the CLR is because I get to write code as a program manager.
Nice.
And because my customers are developers, so I need to write the code that they're going to write to show what the experience is.
Oh, okay. So you write managed code to
I write managed code.
CLR, which is written in C++, mostly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. This is really interesting. First time I've had a talk with a program manager about their job, so I'm learning a lot. And let's just talk about you real quick. Do you have an online presence, something you want to share?
I don't yet, but I've been convinced that I need to.
Okay, all right. Let us know when you do. If you get it on before this show is released, then I will include it in the show notes.
Okay, sounds good.
Layla, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. My favorite thing about being a program manager is I get to talk to everybody, so I get to deal with the technology and have friends.